The rain in London that morning wasn't heavy, just a fine mist, the kind that clings to fabric and settles in silence, more like a presence than weather, a fitting backdrop for a confrontation no one expected. Through the iron gates of Buckingham Palace, the glossy black motorcade cut its path, reflecting the damp gray of the city and the wary eyes of onlookers. Out stepped Senator JD Vance of the United States, his coat sharp, his expression sharper, and on his lapel a small but unmistakable American flag pin catching the dim light like a flare of intent. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below to let me know which country you're watching from. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. He looked around the ancient courtyard with something between contempt and boredom, muttering about the theater of monarchy, about pageantry dressed up as politics, about how, in his mind, real power didn't wear red wool and polished boots. As his aides shifted nervously, sensing the ripple of disapproval in the air, Vance's voice grew louder, not in volume but in arrogance, in the deliberate tone of a man who believed ceremony should bow before pragmatism. He dismissed the changing of the guard as a medieval LARP, scoffing at the scarlet-coated soldiers, at the polished rifles and creased tunics, as if history itself were a costume drama. But something in the courtyard refused to yield to his disregard, an immovable figure standing like a statue cut from silence and resolve. Lance Corporal Edward Statham. 31, forged by fire, hardened by war, the embodiment of quiet strength, standing in his post not as ornament but as discipline incarnate. Vance's gaze landed on him like a challenge, the kind a child throws at a mountain, not expecting resistance but demanding a reaction. And when he got none, not a blink, not a twitch, it only fueled the senator's need to assert control. He veered off course, away from his delegation, circling Statham like a lion around prey that refused to run. He spoke louder now, taunting, prodding, dissecting the uniform as though it were a lie. He questioned Statham's credentials, mocked his stillness, stepped closer and closer until the line between curiosity and disrespect blurred to nothing. His voice, smug and cutting, pierced the drizzle, "Salute me." That was the moment the courtyard stopped breathing. It was not a request but a command, one he believed his title, his committee seat, and his flag entitled him to give. But Statham remained unmoved. In that silence, something ancient stirred, not anger, not defiance, but principle. And then, like the toll of a bell, Statham moved. Just one motion, slow and deliberate, removing Vance's arm from its unlawful position near his weapon with the kind of grace only absolute control allows. Then, his voice, clear and cold as steel, delivered not a rebuke but a fact: the senator was in violation of palace protocol. No anger. No reaction. Just duty. And somehow, that duty, that composure, that unwavering stillness, spoke louder than any shouted command could. The senator faltered, caught in a moment he couldn't control, because the rules he thought bent to rank did not. Here, the uniform didn't salute authority, it was authority. The crowd, until now restrained, began to shift. Some in awe, some in approval. A quiet murmur passed through tourists. Veterans, children, something sacred had just occurred, and no one dared disrupt it with noise. Then came the reinforcement, not with weapons or orders, but with words. Captain Eliza Montgomery, calm and ironclad in posture, explaining with brutal grace that Statham outranked him while on post, that his silence wasn't passive but protective, that ceremonial duty was not theater but principle under pressure. Brigadier Beaksley added weight, recounting Statham's record, not to defend him, but to remind the senator that some men command not by voice but by presence. And Vance, for all his bluster, was suddenly small, not humiliated, not shamed, but faced with something he couldn't outtalk. A truth deeper than politics, that respect isn't granted by office, it's earned through service. Behind him, the crowd responded, not in protest, but in tribute. One by one, veterans, British and American alike, saluted Statham, not seeking recognition, but giving it, acknowledging that stillness is sometimes the bravest stance. The final words came not from the senator, but from the soldier, quiet and undeniable. This isn't America, Senator. No venom. No pride. Just fact. And in that moment, something shifted, not just in the courtyard, but in the man who had tried to provoke a statue and found instead a monument. Vance walked away, not defeated but changed, and behind him, in the soft drizzle, Statham stood as he had from the beginning, silent, still, and utterly unshaken. No applause followed. No ceremony closed the scene. Only the echo of restraint, the weight of tradition, and the quiet proof that sometimes, the greatest power is in doing nothing at all. And then, like a storm gathering beneath clouded skies, Senator Vance's demeanor shifted, not from misunderstanding but from deliberate challenge. He began to circle Lance Corporal Edward Statham like a wolf who believed the silent figure before him to be prey, not protector. His words, sharp and dismissive, rang out across the ancient stones of the courtyard, questioning not only the purpose of the man in red but the very dignity of the role he embodied. Does he ever actually move? He sneered to an aide, voice pitched just loud enough to cut through the drizzle and land like insult. His footsteps slowed, deliberate, crunching over gravel as he drew closer than any respectful visitor ever would, his presence a violation of both space and spirit. The stillness that Statham maintained, perfect, unwavering, seemed to provoke Vance more than any answer could have. He mistook that calm for fragility, that discipline for theatricality, blind to the centuries of meaning stitched into that scarlet coat and silent stance. With every sardonic comment, auditioning for Madame Tussauds, is he? Vance pushed further, not just into the guard's proximity but into dangerous territory of mockery cloaked in confidence, and yet, Statham stood like stone beneath the drizzle, the sharp lines of his uniform undisturbed, his rifle held with the reverence of someone who has earned the right to wield it. He did not blink, did not twitch, and in that restraint, there was a quiet force more powerful than any shout. Tourists stopped filming. Veterans stiffened. Even the palace aides, trained for diplomacy, looked on with a mixture of horror and restraint. And still Vance stepped forward, his words turning from jest to something meaner, testing, probing, demanding a break in that perfect wall of silence. "You ever actually been in a real fight, Corporal?" he hissed, now almost nose to nose with a soldier who had bled in wars the senator had only read about. But there was no reaction. No reply. Just that same poised, unreadable calm that now stood taller than any monument. And in that moment, though Vance did not yet know it, he had already lost, not to silence, but to what silence could mean in the hands of a man who had mastered it. And then came the moment everything pivoted, the breathless still point where arrogance turned into transgression. Senator Vance, face flushed not from embarrassment but from the simmering heat of entitlement, squared his shoulders and stepped in so close that his presence could no longer be dismissed as mere curiosity. It was intrusion, plain and raw. His eyes narrowed as he stared directly at Statham's motionless face, searching for weakness behind that unbroken gaze, trying to force acknowledgement where none was owed. The drizzle around them seemed to vanish. As if even the rain held its breath. "I'm JD Vance," he declared, his voice louder now, puffed with the self-importance of rank worn like armor. "United States Senator. Armed Services Committee. I've worn the uniform. I understand chain of command." He tapped his lapel, the tiny American flag glinting like a weapon unsheathed, and then, with a voice that carried not request but demand, he dropped the line like a gauntlet at the guard's feet, "Salute me." Gasps rippled through the onlookers like wind catching dry leaves, startled tourists froze mid-photo, children hushed by the weight in the air, veterans tensed as though someone had drawn a blade in sacred ground. The command hung there, absurd and electric, a violation not just of protocol, but of understanding. Statham didn't blink. He didn't even breathe differently. And yet, the refusal, unspoken, unmoving, hit with the force of a thunderclap. Vance mistook the silence for insubordination. But everyone else, from the British officers watching carefully to the veterans with eyes hard and knowing, saw it for what it was, restraint honed into iron. Still, Vance wasn't done. He stepped closer. His voice sharpened to a point. "I'm giving you a direct order, soldier." He gestured now, finger raised, not touching, but close enough that several observers recoiled instinctively, as if contact would burn. "Salute me. Right now." The words echoed against stone and history, cutting through the stillness like a knife that didn't draw blood but tried to wound pride. But Statham remained. Rooted. Resolute. And in that moment, surrounded by history, by eyes that had seen war and peace, by the very heartbeat of British tradition, the loudest thing in the entire courtyard was not the senator's voice. It was the silence that answered it, and then, with the weight of centuries pressing into that rain-slicked courtyard. The silence broke, but not with the chaos Vance had tried to summon. It broke with discipline. With emotion so calm, so deliberate, it felt like time had slowed to witness it. Lance Corporal Edward Statham, after withstanding a storm of mockery, pressure, and blatant provocation, moved at last, not in aggression, not in emotion, but in precise duty. His left hand rose smoothly, the white glove glowing against the damp gray air, and with the ease of a man trained to act only with purpose, he guided Senator Vance's encroaching arm away from his rifle, firmly, respectfully, and undeniably. No rush, no hesitation. Just the quiet strength of a soldier who knows his ground, and stands it. And then, in a voice as clear as frost and as controlled as parade cadence, he spoke, not to shame, not to escalate, but to uphold the sacred rules that kept chaos at bay. "Sir," he began, his eyes still locked forward in perfect ceremonial gaze, "you are in direct violation of standing palace protocol to Bravo regarding interference with ceremonial personnel." The words rang out like steel tapping marble, each syllable crisp, memorized, and absolutely immovable. Vance blinked. For the first time, he faltered, not from fear, but from the stunning realization that the man he tried to provoke into submission had just responded with something far more devastating, unwavering, impersonal authority. Physical encroachment upon an armed ceremonial guard constitutes a security infraction, Statham continued, calm as ever, unshaken by the crowd, by the rank, by the power politics coiled in front of him. "I must respectfully instruct you to return to the designated visitor's path." It wasn't just protocol, it was a line in the sand. And as that final phrase settled over the gathered watchers like a verdict, something shifted in the air. Slowly, deliberately, a veteran in a dark blazer, his chest heavy with medals earned not in parades but in fire, stood straighter, and saluted. No words. Just a gesture rich with meaning. Another followed. Then another. A retired Marine from the American security detail stepped forward and, with a silent nod, added his own salute to the growing chorus, not of defiance, but of respect. Not with fists or threats, but with unbreakable principle. Vance remained silent, his posture shifting, no longer commanding but uncertain. Around him, tourists lowered their phones, not wanting to turn reverence into spectacle. Children looked on with wide eyes, sensing that they'd just witnessed something far more powerful than a politician's voice, a soldier's dignity. Statham, for his part, said nothing else. He had returned to perfect stillness, as if the entire confrontation had been no more than a breeze. But the crowd knew better. That quiet now belonged to him. Not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it, just as the last echoes of applause faded and the atmosphere settled into a reverent hush. A new presence emerged across the slick stone courtyard, not loud, not rushed, but unmistakably commanding. Captain Eliza Montgomery, Palace Protocol Officer and former NATO attaché, moved through the mist like someone born of precision, each step calm, her uniform razor-sharp and bearing radiating the kind of quiet authority that makes rooms still without a word. She didn't raise her voice or flash a badge, she didn't need to. With a subtle but unmissable gesture, she approached Senator Vance, guiding him a few paces aside, away from the now silent crowd and the unwavering sentinel behind him. "Senator Vance," she began evenly, her tone laced with the politeness only British steel can wear so elegantly. "I understand there may have been some confusion regarding ceremonial protocol. She never chastised. She simply explained, with that unnerving calm honed through years of diffusing tensions far more combustible than this. Palace guards, she continued, are sworn to the crown. While on duty, their authority supersedes that of all visiting personnel, including elected officials from allied nations. Her pause was perfectly timed, letting the words settle like a gavel. Including senators. Vance opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, to reassert, to reframe, but before any defense could form, another figure stepped into the soft rain with the weight of living history in his stride, Brigadier Alan Beaksley. Less crisp than Montgomery, more weathered, yet carrying that unmistakable gravity of someone who had earned his stripes not behind podiums but in the grit of command. His voice, when it came, was low, measured, but resolute. Lance Corporal Statham, he said, is not a prop. He is a combat-decorated infantryman. Last deployed under Operation New Barricade. Before that, joint exercises with your own Marines in Anbar. There was no ego in his delivery, only fact, one soldier vouching for another. What you saw today was not defiance. It was discipline. The same discipline that keeps men alive under fire. Vance said nothing. His hands were still, his expression tight, caught between indignation and dawning comprehension. For the first time, his voice did not rise to meet rank. And perhaps, in that silence, something within him shifted, not just politically, but fundamentally. For in front of him stood a man who had tested a tradition and found it unshakable, not through resistance, but through unbending purpose. And around him stood those who guarded it, not with aggression, but with honor. And so, without a single word of apology, without a bow or admission, Senator JD Vance did the only thing left to him: he stepped back. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't even deliberate. It was instinctive, almost involuntary, like a man who had finally realized he'd been speaking too loudly in a cathedral. The distance he created wasn't just physical, it was emotional, ideological, personal. His posture, once rigid with self-importance, softened by degrees, his shoulders no longer squared in defiance but edged in something quieter. Awareness, perhaps, maybe shame, or simply the dawning weight of consequence. His gaze lingered not on Captain Montgomery or Brigadier Beaksley, not even on the silent crowd still hushed in observation, but on Lance Corporal Edward Statham, still frozen in duty, utterly untouched by ego or circumstance. For a fleeting moment, Vance looked like a man trying to understand something deeper than protocol, something about presence, about sacrifice, about what it means to serve not to be seen, but to stand. His aides, who had once trailed behind like shadows, now hovered close, uncertain whether to speak or wait, and wisely chose the latter. There was no instruction now, no bluster. No quip. Just Vance, standing slightly apart from everyone, staring across the ancient stones of Buckingham Palace's courtyard at a man who had said almost nothing, and in doing so, had said everything. It wasn't defeat etched into Vance's face as he finally turned, it was recognition, muted and heavy. Not the kind that seeks forgiveness, but the kind that lingers like a stone in the pocket long after you've walked away. He took a slow breath, nodded once, to no one, or maybe to himself, and began the long, quiet walk back toward his delegation. No entourage flanking him. No cameras rolling. Just footsteps echoing behind him like the soft rain falling over royal stone, and a lesson not spoken. But felt, as Senator Vance stepped away, his figure growing smaller beneath the soft gray mist, the courtyard did not erupt into applause or commentary. Instead, it settled into something far more profound, a sacred stillness, like the final note of a hymn left hanging in the air. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, movement returned, but not from the soldiers. From those who had been watching. Near the rope barrier, a distinguished elderly man in a navy blazer, his chest a tapestry of medals earned in conflicts long past, stepped forward with the weight and care of someone who understood exactly what had just taken place. He paused just beyond the invisible line of protocol, that sacred boundary respected by those who know the cost of breaking it. And then, in one fluid, reverent motion, he raised his weathered hand in a textbook salute. Not to draw attention. Not to perform. But to honor. Lance Corporal Statham didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because this wasn't about exchange, it was about recognition. Another man followed, younger, perhaps a retired officer himself. His face solemn, his gesture crisp. Then, almost hesitantly, a member of the American security detail, a graying Marine by the cut of his posture, stepped forward. He didn't say a word. He simply locked eyes for a heartbeat with the still, silent figure in red, and then brought his hand to his brow, a slow, deliberate salute across oceans, across uniforms, across everything that divides nations but never divides service. One by one, they came, some in silence, some with eyes wet from memory, tourists and veterans alike, each salute a quiet defiance of cynicism, a tribute not to grandeur but to restraint. There were no cameras lifted. No hashtags forming. No speeches given. Because everyone knew this wasn't about a photo opportunity or patriotism wrapped in sound bites. It was about something older, deeper, the quiet bond between those who have worn the weight of duty on their shoulders and understand what it means to hold a line when provoked, when challenged, when disrespected. And through it all, Statham stood, unchanged, unshaken, unwavering. Not basking in a moment, not demanding praise, but embodying the very principle that had drawn the salutes in the first place. His gaze, forever fixed at ceremonial angle, did not flicker. His rifle, perfectly cradled, never shifted. His silence, the same silence Vance had tried to fill with command, now echoed louder than any order ever could. Respect, in that courtyard, no longer wore rank or title. It stood in stillness and discipline, unbent by ego, unswayed by theater. And as the motorcade's lights faded beyond the gates, as the mist draped once more across the old stones, the moment passed, but the message lingered. Sometimes, the greatest power lies not in the voice raised loudest, but in the one that never needed to speak at all. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit like and share it. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring videos. Thanks again and see you in the next one.